The Foxwife by Yangsze Choo is a tantalizing story that combines the Chinese and Malaysian myths of foxes with the historic fall of the Qing dynasty. Choo's third novel, following the massive success of The Night Tiger, fulfills a promise of the same rich characters, interesting folklore, and mystery. Set in 1908 Manchuria, this magical realism novel follows the intertwining tales of a middle-aged detective with a knack for sensing lies and a foxwoman, a mysterious being who can embody both human and animal forms. Overflowing with well-rounded characters, The Foxwife welcomes its readers into a world of charming foxes and the humans they encounter along their journeys. While filled with hidden magic and lore, this novel also explores deep and familiar human struggles such as grief, generational trauma, and lost loves. Yangsze Choo, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm so excited to talk about your third novel, The Foxwife. Could you give us a little synopsis of the book?
Well, thank you for having me. It is my pleasure. The Foxwife is about foxes. And when I first, and actually just not the usual red fox, but the shape-shifting foxes of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean literature that I read about when I was a child. And when I first started writing this novel, I think my editor asked me, "What is this book about?" And I said, "It's about foxes." And then she said, "Oh, please don't tell me this is about talking animals." I said, no, they appear as people. And that is the way in Chinese literature they also show up. They are tricky, cunning creatures with the power to assume human form. And as a child, I always thought these stories were fascinating and also very strange. And so when I started writing the novel, I thought about what would it be like to see the world from the perspective of one of these creatures.
So you have kind of two protagonists you go back and forth with in the novel, Bao the detective and Snow the fox. Did you always know you wanted both of them as protagonists, or did you start with one character and then kind of add the other?
I did actually. So this goes back to the not planning one's novels, but I started with the fox, the voice of the fox. It actually came to me while I was finishing off my second novel, The Night Tiger, and I sat down and wrote the first chapter pretty much as you see it, with a fox telling you about what life is like for her. And then I started chapter 2. I had meant to make this fairly linear, but when I wrote chapter 2, the words "the detective" appeared suddenly, and I thought, ooh, there's a detective here. So I sort of ran with it, and that's how you come up with the alternating viewpoints. It's not something I planned to do. I did that for Night Tiger, but somehow it happened again.
I was wondering if you wrote out the whole plot linearly first, because I know you kind of go back and forth a lot to the past and the present, or did you kind of end up writing it the way that it is in the novel?
I ended up writing it the way that it is. And the reason I'm laughing is because for many years my husband has been saying things like, if you would only write an outline, things would be so much easier. Unfortunately, I don't seem to work with an outline. The story happens as it occurs to me. And so I wrote this book very much as you read it, with chapter 1, and then chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. And it is very short chapters, and I think that's helpful to me as a writer because you just try to move it forward, and hopefully it's fun for readers too when it's not too long.
I've read that your other novels, The Ghost Bride and The Night Tiger, took about 3 to 4 years to write. Is that kind of the span of how long it took to write The Foxwife?
Unfortunately, yes. I am a slow writer. Part of the problem might be this whole not outlining thing. But I do feel that when I'm writing, you know, it occurs to me like, it feels like you're listening to music. So there's a piece of music going on in the back of your mind. And sometimes you have a sense that, oh no, something's happening. Dun, 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 dun. Something bad might happen here. So that's how I think the novel appears to me, but sometimes I do get stuck. That is the other problem of not having an outline. Like when it works well, it's really fun. And when it doesn't work, there's just a lot of, oh no, writer's block. So
Yeah.
I think that contributes to why I've been slow.
What do you usually do when you get faced with that writer's block?
Actually, I found the best piece of advice is to go on a walk or sometimes set the piece aside completely. I've put things away for weeks, sometimes months. Don't tell my agent this. But, when it's just not, I've actually sometimes written myself into a box in which I'm like, I don't know what all these people are doing. Who wrote this book? Oh my goodness, it's me. It's terrible. So put it aside, do something else, maybe work on something else. And if all else fails, I eat a lot of chocolate.
There you go. Was there a favorite part you had of writing The Foxwife?
Can I say all the fox bits? So half the book is written as, in the point of view of the fox. And it was really delightful to do that. Partly, I think, I would describe myself as being a middle-aged auntie now. And it was nice to write about a character who wasn't 16 years old. Part of The Foxwife is, it is a story of old love. Old loves, first loves, missed loves. And my favorite Jane Austen novel is actually Persuasion, because there's so much yearning and longing and the idea of second chances for what might have been. When I started writing the novel, the idea that you might have a long-lived creature, a fox, as well as a detective who is kind of an old guy as well, and for both of them to be pursuing their own first loves, I thought that was really interesting.
Was there any other novels that inspired this one?
Not off the top of my head, but I am a big fan of Haruki Murakami, and I love how he seamlessly combines sort of the magical or the unreal with the corporeal world. And that's what I sort of try to do with The Foxwife. And I read a lot of recipe books because I like to cook as well. So this novel was originally twice its length, and I always had to cut things out because my agent's like, why are they always having dinner? Why is there another banquet? And now you've listed like 10 dishes. And I thought, oh yeah, right. So I also enjoy reading recipe books. I also, the food of Northeast China. I did a lot of research into that.
A lot of eating, too.
Yeah, I did. And actually, my kids always joke, like, they can tell, when they come home from school, they're like, Mummy, why is there so much food for dinner? Clearly, you did not do any writing today. So,
Like, you just stay on top of it.
it's a kind of procrastination, I think. You keep yourself busy, and then you feel like, well, I did do something. I made a lot of steamed buns. Like, I didn't do any writing.
Do you have a particular favorite character in The Foxwife?
It might be the fox. And actually, there's several foxes. Is that a spoiler?
I don't think so.
There's one fox who's actually quite bad. And I hadn't planned on him either, but he was actually very fun to write. It is interesting, when I was writing this novel and writing about foxes, I wanted to keep this slightly inhuman quality about them. There is a kind of animal instinct, also a playful carelessness, I think, that we don't often see in humans. And so that was very fun.
What got you first interested in foxes?
Well, as I said, I did a lot of research on foxes. And I think one of the wonderful things about writing fiction is that all one's hobbies can be research. And I've always been fascinated by foxes, not just because of the stories from Chinese and Japanese and Korean literature, but because it is such an interesting creature. And I think no matter where you are in the world, whether it is the Native American myths or Europe or Asia, the nature of the fox seems remarkably similar. It is a wily trickster, and foxes can solve lots of problems by themselves. I think they've actually been caught on camera, like opening boxes and tunneling under your house. So they're innately, I think, fascinating. And the idea that this creature could assume human form and therefore go on to wreak destruction in our lives was just something that I was very taken with.
Are you naturally an animal lover? Because I know your last novel kind of had like an animal theme as well.
Yes, you've got me. I do. I like animals a lot. I'm interested in animals. And I also like plants. So I'm an avid gardener as well. My favorite podcast is the BBC's Gardener's Question Time, like GQT. And whenever it comes on, my whole family's like, stop, turn off GQT.
You mentioned that in the acknowledgments section of this novel that your mother has a Chinese literature degree. Mm-hmm. Did she kind of inspire you in your vein of writing?
Well, it's very funny because my mum is actually a very practical person. And all the books that I've written, like The Ghost Bride, which is about the marriage to a dead man, and Night Tiger, which was about weird tigers, in all of them, my mum has always said, couldn't you choose something more uplifting? Why not more cheerful? But she does have a Chinese literature degree, and it's been, I think over the years, it's been really helpful. I can always ask her, like, Mummy, like this particular character, like, you can write it as in the written characters. So I can read and write Chinese, but my mum is much, much better. And so I'll run things by her. And a lot of the names in my novels I've run by my mum as well, because Chinese names are always chosen to have a meaning. Because in some of my previous novels, there's a pun hidden in the names. So my mum was really not personally very much into tales of the supernatural, but it has actually been really great that she's has this literary Chinese degree, because literary Chinese is in some ways a different language from the spoken Chinese. The literary form is seldom used now, but it is like what they use for poetry and records, and it is very abbreviated. It is almost shorthand. They'll use different terms for normal words. And in university, I took one class in literary Chinese. It was the most helpful class ever.
The setting of this novel is 1908 Manchuria, correct? Mm-hmm. What parts of The Foxwife are fictional and what parts are like true historical fact?
Oh, well, the whole setting is historical. There is a Chinese saying that foxes and ghosts appear during times of chaos. And so when I was writing the novel, I thought it would be great to set it in 1908, which was the last year of the Dowager Empress's life. So the setting, if you picture it, it is the waning days of the last imperial Chinese dynasty. And it is not a Han Chinese dynasty, but it is considered a foreign dynasty. It's Manchu. And while she was dying, the proper emperor was under house arrest. The northeast of China was being carved up. Russia and Japan had designs on it. And at the same time, they were indeed building railways. So this South Manchuria Railway, which shows up in the novel, if you've read Night Tiger, you probably noticed that I love trains. So I really did actually start with the railroad. These are all historical.
In, I believe, The Night Tiger, you actually went out and visited places to conduct research. Did you travel at all to research for The Foxwife?
I did. It was very fun. I actually dragged my family along. They're like, oh dear. Mukden, which is a city which shows up in the novel, is modern-day Shenyang. And Shenyang is now a huge factory city. The northeast is sort of like China's Rust Belt. And when I had told some of my Chinese friends, like, I'm planning to go to China they're like, why are you going there? There's nothing historical left. It's mostly factories. But I really wanted to go. But where I actually went first was Hangzhou, Suzhou, which is further south. And I did that to research the gardens and the historical mansions of the literati. So as you might have noticed in the novel, a lot of it takes place in these wonderful courtyard houses that they used to have, many of which were designed around many gardens. And that area, Hangzhou, Suzhou, has historically had over 100 private gardens, some of them supposedly dating back 1,000 years. I thought, since it's 1908, it is an interesting contrast to see that while the world is burning down outside your courtyard doors, within, people are still living, having dinner parties, it's a bit like the fall of Rome. So I went there, and it was very interesting, especially if you like plants, which I do. And then I was planning to go back again when COVID happened. And so all travel shut down. So I actually moved the second half of the book to Japan. I find it very hard to write about a place that I haven't visited before. And I spent part of my childhood in Japan. And I had been to what is now called Kitakyushu, but in the book is Mojiko. So it was a port that was facing China. So they had a lot of coal going to northeast China. And so that's how the second half of the book is set in Japan.
What made writing The Foxwife different than your other two novels?
Well, the other two were set in Malaysia. So I am originally from Malaysia, and I knew the area quite well. When I started writing The Foxwife, I thought, I want to write a book about foxes. But foxes do not naturally occur in Malaysia. And being a big animal lover, I wanted to make sure it was the correct habitat, etc. So I did actually think, like, well, they could get on a boat, but this is... I think that's too difficult. The ancestral home of the fox cult is actually northeast China. And many of these stories are so-called historical eyewitness accounts of encounters with foxes in human form are purportedly from the northeast. And so that decided where it was going to be.
The foxes in this novel are mainly black and white, which are different than perhaps the foxes we're used to. So why did you choose those colors?
Because of the annals of history. There are so many mentions of foxes in Chinese history. They are often taken as omens or oracles. And it was said that whenever a black or white fox appeared, they would try to trap it and send it to the emperor. So they do exist in the wild, in the red fox population. They are rare. It is kind of a genetic anomaly to get a black or white fox. So I'm sure they were even rarer in the past if every time they were seen, they were trapped. So I think that's what led to that.
Ghost Bride was adapted into a Netflix original series, So how was the process of getting your novel adapted?
Well, it was very exciting. And I have to confess that I was actually pushing my shopping cart around Trader Joe's when I got a text from my agent. He said, by the way, Netflix is interested in you. I was like, great, give it to them. Tell them they can have it. And she's like, no, wait, this is why you have an agent. So they adapted it. I did not actually, I did not have anything to do with the screenplay or the writing. I know some authors do, but I think that writing a screenplay is a completely different art form from writing a novel. And they had said that they would adapt it. So it was very exciting.
Do you think that there's any cinematic plans for The Foxwife in the future?
So far, not that I know of, but fingers crossed, perhaps one day.
Are you working on another novel next?
Yes.
That you can talk about?
I'm just laughing because, like I said, I'm a slow writer, and I am working on another novel. It is about plants. So I'm trying to think of a way to talk about it that sounds interesting. Because when I was telling my husband about it, I was like, I want to write about ginseng. And he's like, oh no, why? So, but ginseng is, I think, for Asian herbal lore, it is the number one medicine. You know, ginseng, the root, which often looks like a human, and is purported to have almost miraculous qualities about it. And the ginseng root, it can grow for 100 years. The wild ones, you know, if anyone digs at a wild root, it's sort of like, oh, I've made my fortune. You know, they sell for a lot of money. So I am working on a book about ginseng. I did some research on it. And what interests me about it, I mean, the reason I'm hesitant is because I am slow. And it might be, if you ask me this question in 9 months' time, I'll be like, no, well, we're actually doing mugwort now. So, but I think it'll be another historical novel. I'm still working my way through it.
Magical realism has really picked up in the last 5 to 10 years. Why do you think that genre's become so popular now?
I think humans have always wanted to combine the spiritual with the material world. And it is only in the last perhaps 150 years of Western scientific thought that it has been so clearly separated. But in the rest of the world, particularly Asia, I think you live with this idea that besides the physical world, there are many other things going on. So, for example, in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, people are very superstitious. My own grandmother was very superstitious. So, for Chinese, you need to say lucky things. There's this whole idea about lucky numbers. Lucky numbers being like 3, 6, 8, because they're homophones. They sound like the number 8, which is bat in Cantonese, also sounds like fat, which is luck. So when you're giving numbers out, for example, people will comment. So you're like, yes, you can look for my, this is my house number. It's number 88. And everybody like, oh, good number. And things like if you happen to get a good license plate for your motorcycle, your car, and it's a good series, like it says something like 3 and 2, 3亿, it sounds like 3亿, it sounds like business. People might be like, I want to buy your motorcycle license plate. So the idea of the divine and the spiritual is imbued into everyday life. People talk about it all the time. And they plan things around things.
Yeah.
Like lucky days. People also like to buy lottery numbers. There was a craze for a while in Malaysia for a certain kind of aquarium fish, which had spots on it. And I think it was because somebody said they'd won the lotto by counting the number of spots on their fish. So there's just a lot of that, and it's pretty much accepted as part of life.
You have several things like food and foxes, and these certain topics are used as vessels to kind of fuel the magical parts into the realistic setting. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, I think there are certainly themes in my work. Now that I've written 3 novels, I can look back like, oh, I see a certain consistency emerging. And as you mentioned, trains, transportation, and also dreams. Dreams have appeared in all 3 of my books. And it wasn't until later that I thought about, why are they there? The dream itself is actually the vehicle for a lot of Chinese ghost stories. The typical Chinese ghost story appears in a dream. You have a dream and someone should, and as in The Ghost Bride, usually it is a dead relative who shows up and says, by the way, I would like to get married, and would you please find me a bride? So I think that's something that's always struck me as really interesting, this Chinese belief in dreams, and also the Chinese idea that if someone is clearly having a dream, you should not wake them because their soul might be wandering around somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that is different from the Western instinct, which is to say if someone's having a nightmare, you want to wake them up quickly. So the Foxwife also has some dream elements in it. But to me, it is also a way, I think, of connecting with the bigger themes, the worries, the anxieties, and also the hopes and fears that we have. So they have featured in all 3 of my books. The other interesting thing is that when I've gone on book tour, I love talking to readers. And people have all these stories that it almost feels that they want to share. Like, I want to tell you about my dead uncle who appeared in a dream. Or I had a dream about this. And it's just so interesting. It is a way of sharing something about yourself. And sometimes, very often, it is something that perhaps we, the dreamers, don't quite understand. A dream is often best expressed, I find, when you talk about it with people that you love and trust, like your friends. You'd be like, I dreamt that, I had turned into a hamburger. And they'd be like, oh, well, that's clearly because we passed by that large McDonald's billboard. So it's really helpful to have the people in your life help you. And if you look back through history, through the Bible and everywhere else, there's also, besides dreams, there have always been the role of the dream interpreter, who I think sometimes biblically were prophets, and other times they are wise people or oracles.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure and an honor. Thank you for having me.